How can you personalize your messaging to physicians for greater prescription intent? What are people saying about your brand? How can you make your marketing efforts more precise and effective? These and many more questions are answered on this podcast, which is here to serve as a playbook for all your pharma marketing needs. As your host, Soumya Prakash, co founder of Multiplier AI Solutions, sits across pharma industry's top experts. This is your place to get all the insights about Gen AI, data, and beyond.
And welcome to another exciting episode of the Pharma Marketing Playbook Data, Gen AI, and Beyond, your go to podcast for mastering pharmaceutical marketing, data analytics, and AI trends. Join industry leaders as we explore cutting edge trends and strategies with the impact of AI. Tune in for more actionable insights and stay ahead in the dynamic world of pharma marketing. I am Soumya Prakash, co founder Multiplier AI, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Mr. Salil Kalyanpur. Mr. Salil Kalyanpur began his career as a scientific officer at Serdia Pharmaceutical. Over the past 2 decades, he has worked in key roles, including head of marketing at Pfizer Limited and executive vice president at GSK. He has also held significant positions at Dr. Reddy's Laboratories and Novartis. Currently, Salil is the founder and managing director of ARCS Knowledge Consulting Private Limited and a visiting professor at SVKM's Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies. As an industry expert, he brings a wealth of experience and insight to our show. So, thank you so much, Mr. Salil, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Soumya. Nice pleasure to be here.
So, to begin with, Salil, you have had such an impressive career in pharma, starting as a scientific officer at Serdia and then moving through various roles across the top names Dr. Reddy's, Novartis, Pfizer, GSK. So, I would just ask you to reflect on your journey and tell us a bit more what were some of the key milestones and motivations on these transitions, and how have you seen the evolution happening in your journey?
Well, when the journey happened, I don't think I actually thought about it, because it was just taking an opportunity when you see one or doing something that you found interesting, that sort of a thing, right? So I graduated in pharmacy and then I joined Serdia, and that was a time when Serdia taught us the importance of using science in selling. And so at that point of time, we probably didn't have much of segmentation, targeting, and positioning of products because I remember that we used to detail every product to every doctor that we met. And so, I've detailed anti-Parkinson products to cardiologists, for example. So that kind of flies in the face of anything remotely close to STP. But at that point of time, it was not so much STP, but it was about how science could be used to create value inside a doctor's clinic. And doctors used to reciprocate, so we used to get very positive feedback from doctors about the value of the information that we were bringing. Now, this was the pre-internet era, the pre-digital era in pharma, and so the rep used to be the sole communicator or the sole harbinger of medical information. And so the more the science we used, the more the doctors responded to us. So that was a very, very important learning very early in my career, where I did not find the need for transactional marketing or transactional selling or any sort of use of transactions in building customer relationships. After that, after a significantly long time in sales, about 5.5 years, I decided that I wanted to get into marketing. And so, as any youngster would do in the pharmaceutical industry, the role of a product manager becomes very, very attractive. And so an advisor, somebody who I trusted, told me to get an MBA, and so I did that, and then eventually moved into Dr. Reddy's as in the marketing team. That was a different experience entirely, culturally and from a point of thinking more about strategy than tactics, which is where sales and marketing becomes very different. And so I had a wonderful mentor in Dr. Reddy's, and my manager was very, very interested in the art of creativity and in able to come up with solutions which are not run of the mill. And so the importance of creativity, the importance of thinking outside of the box, thinking about more and more solutions, not taking the most obvious one, and all of that, I learned a lot of those principles which stood me in good stead much later in my career. Now, DRL then eventually led towards an opportunity in Novartis, and so I moved to Mumbai and joined Novartis. Novartis was a very short stint because Novartis wasn't really very, very strong in cardiology at that point of time, and my experience was mostly in cardiology, both in Sevier as well as in Dr. Reddy's. And the reason I got hired in Novartis was that, but there were certain problems with product, or there was a delay in the launch of the portfolio, and eventually an opportunity from Pfizer came through. And so Pfizer was also looking for someone in cardiology, and that was like 9 years of my career. And so Pfizer was the largest pharma group of its time. It is a different experience to be associated with a brand that big. And so, the it was a great mix of science based selling and the ability to kind of come up with differentiation strategies in a generic market. And so while our the growth of the top line was not very encouraging now when I look at it from hindsight, but the experience of doing that was very fulfilling and satisfying. And so we had a group of colleagues who took great pride in being a part of that brand. And so, execution was flawless, almost flawless. The ability to understand how a strategy can convert into tactics was also very good. And so there was a very strong culture of thinking and doing in Pfizer that I noticed, or I was happy to be a part of. Eventually, after a long period of time, about 18 years in India, I got a global opportunity from GSK. And although it was not global in terms of location, it was global in terms of the scope of the project. And so GSK had set up a center of excellence, which is basically a global capability center in Mumbai. And we had a dispersed team based out of Singapore, London, and India, which was taking care of about a £3 billion business. And that was like 10% of GSK turnover at that time. But what was attractive was that their biggest brand, Seretide, was losing exclusivity soon. So in about 2 years, a brand of that size, which was like 40% of their total turnover, was coming into our business. And so suddenly the value that we were dealing with was huge. And we were like a significant part of GSK's business. Also, at that point of time, GSK's pipeline wasn't really kicking in. It happened much later. And so it was going through a lean phase, and there was a greater dependence on being able to expand the life cycle of products, and which was something that was quite alien to the Western world. And so, they were picking up people from India, and I thought that was a good chance to be a part of a global operations. And so then eventually I did a stint in Mexico, I did a stint in Europe, I did a stint in Istanbul for the Middle East region, and then eventually came back to India, and because of personal exigency, and then eventually decided to leave the industry and start on my own. So that's as far as my journey has been in the corporate world.
What a remarkable entire journey. And I think there are so many takeaways and lessons for our audience and those of us who feel that selling is hard. You should definitely hear the long journey and the learnings, right from scientific based selling to changing across the challenges of based brands, learning in a pre-digital, pre-internet era. So much to learn from this journey. So wonderful thoughts there. Great learning. You've also mentioned that you worked in various countries such as Russia, across Europe, and had so much of an international experience as a business strategist. Could you share your thoughts and experience and key takeaways for the brand managers who are looking into expanding internationally and face similar challenges today?
Yeah, so slight correction. I haven't worked in Russia per se, or I was in the region, right? And so the regional role is slightly different. It's what we used to refer to as an above country role. And so while Russia was a part of the geography that we were managing, it came in much later. But then there were a lot of differing countries, such as the Middle East countries, the African countries, the Gulf and Near East countries, the embargo markets, the CIS markets, which are all completely different. So geographically, geopolitically, culturally, economically, there was a wide area of organizations, people, and cultures that we dealt with. So that was just the MENA stint. But I had past experience of Europe for a year. Europe is a completely different cluster of markets, very, very different. From a regulatory perspective, it's probably one of the most regulated, most stringent markets in the world, and it's extremely difficult to sell off patent products over there. The South American markets were a completely different ball game. A lot of them, much like India, but had different, they were largely distributor led markets. So the differences in cultural differences in the world, I think, are the most important things that anyone who's looking to build a career in international marketing must appreciate. And I used to teach a course in NMIMS on international marketing, and so that was my greatest focus, right? So it's important to understand where that culture comes from, and that culture essentially explains to us the culture, the history, the values of the people. They have a correlation with the policy frameworks of each market. And so being able to understand why policy frameworks in certain markets are so different. For example, why is Europe in a certain way? Now, Europe, I say it as a country, right? But if you look at the Western European markets, let's say the United Kingdom, for example. So United Kingdom is a very different market when you compare it with Spain. Spain is very different from Ukraine, and Ukraine is very different from India. India is different from China, so on and so forth. So, why is every market so different? Why are health systems so different? And I think a lot of it has its basis in the culture and the heritage of that country. So I would really encourage students or people, young professionals, to spend a lot of time trying to understand those things. Now, one of the things that I used to do when I went into those markets was walk. I know it's easier when you are in colder climates where walking is easy. And I'm not talking about cities, right? Go off track and you just wander into small hamlets or villages or something like that. One thing is that you must be very careful about whether it is safe or not. So, for example, in Mexico, you can't just wander around anywhere, but in Turkey or in Europe, it's relatively safer to do that. You can just walk around. But I learned a lot about every market by reading and by talking to people. Now, language has a wonderful way, humans have a very interesting way in communicating. So, even if you don't understand the language, you can understand the essence of what that person is trying to tell you. So even if you have no idea what the Greek gentleman is saying, you will still get a sense of what is being talked about. And then there'll be somebody who will translate it in broken English or something. So you gather bits and pieces of information about their history, about their culture and all that, which you cannot get from textbooks. So I think the immersion is very important. I think it's very important to think about that. And you can be successful, more successful as a pharma professional when you understand these things. Now, many of the pharma professionals who I coach or guide or teach always look at the regulatory part of the market as a great disabler, as a great barrier to doing business. I don't think that's right. I think it's a misunderstanding of why that health system, why that policy guideline is in place. So, getting culture, getting history, getting context helps you to understand why that is happening. For example, in Japan, Japan is one of the last developed markets to approve a pharma product, and they probably take about 7 or 8 years to launch a pharma product, right? While the US is the first market in which a brand manager or a marketing guy will launch his product, Europe being number two, and then Japan is very late in the horizon. Now, why does that happen? Because Japan is a very internally oriented culture, right? They were colonizers, they haven't been colonized. And so there's not much of their culture which has gone away. And so they have a culture of frugality, they have a culture of simplicity, they have a culture
Yes.
where they are not dying for the next big thing. A bright, shiny new toy is not attractive to them. And that has everything. No pharma code will tell you this. You have to understand the culture of the people, and then you know why their regulator takes such a long time to approve a new product. And so that helps in the discussions that you have with people there, that it helps you to kind of understand how to build a strategy. It helps you to understand. So all those things are very necessary, and that's, I think, the greatest takeaway that you can get from an international exposure. If you're looking at strategy, if you're the worst thing that you can do, and every multinational company without exception in India is guilty of doing this, they treat their strategy is very polycentric, meaning that they think of every market as a replica of the United States. And so a global strategy is given down to the marketing teams in India, and they are asked to make variations on based on that. So you have the global strategy as the backbone of the whole plan, and then you put in your little variations over there, which is not the right way to do it. And I would suggest that, I think very much that every market should do their own bottom up planning, and kind of have, so that level of empowerment, that level of decentralization hasn't reached pharma. And so sometimes the lack of understanding of culture, the lack of understanding of historical contexts within markets can be detrimental to business. And if you that's I think one of the greatest differences between a Unilever and a GSK. Both are based in the same place, right? They're both London based companies, but look at the way that Unilever lives in India or has done business in India versus how GSK has. So I think those are some of the greatest lessons that I have learned, and I think that is some of the greatest strategy thingy, or something that can help you build better strategies as a person who's interested in expanding his career internationally.
Absolutely, this is gold standard advice, and I 100% completely agree that country specific understanding is the core of strategy. One size fits all will possibly not work at all, and very valuable lessons on how starkly the cultural differences impact strategic insights, and then kind of the go to market motion for any product or any kind of service that we are trying to put in there. Absolutely gold standard advice. So coming back, what strategies do you think have been more effective for engaging healthcare professionals and patients, specifically in today's digital era, where we have seen that there's been tremendous changes in the way marketing has evolved over years. So how do you find that?
So I think the gold standard for any engagement, any customer engagement, is basically value creation. And so whether it is doctors, whether it is pharmacists, whether it is patients, whether it is government regulators or hospital administrators, whoever the stakeholder is, value creation has to happen in a way which affects them and not our brand. Right. So the shift from product centricity to customer centricity is work in progress in pharma. And I think that is one of the greatest drawbacks to this industry, because we still are pushing products, we are still talking about our brands, and the consequence of this kind of myopic thinking has been that we have lost connect with customers, and relationships have moved away. Now relationships are great, but people based. Right. So I'm sure many people who listen to this will say, what is he talking about? Pharma has great relationship with their doctors. Of course they do. But the point to ask is it with the rep or is it with your brand? Right. Now it could be both. But I suspect that, the doctor actually prescribes a brand more out of his love and admiration for the rep who comes in. Right? It is because he's become a friend, or he's coming regularly to me for 10 years or 6 years or 1 year or 2 years or something like that. And so what we generally see is when you replace people in territories, business takes a backseat. And so that leads you to understanding whether there is an affinity with your brand or there's an affinity with people who are involved. And that's probably one of the pros and probably a con of human relationships, right? The relationship becomes with a human and it doesn't become a brand. And so I think value creation, that's great from a value creation perspective, but then how is that relationship centralized? How does the organization take over that brand versus that relationship with that customer, and not make it dependent on that one individual, that person who is interfacing with that customer? That's a tough part. That's very tough. And so the whole concept of value creation requires to be redrawn. It's a fresh slate kind of a thing. But unfortunately, few pharma companies are showing interest in doing this because it can kind of jar your business, and we all know. And so that's why I don't call myself a digital expert or a digital marketing expert. I call myself a digital transformation consultant. And I focus more on the transformation part and not on digital marketing. So I'm not going to tell you how to make a website or how to promote a website. I'm going to tell you what it requires to think about operating in a digital world. Influences on our customers have become different. Value creating opportunities are being diversified, right? The doctors are finding value from probably apps, or they're finding digital outreach to be much more informative than a medical rep coming to them and doing that. So I think at customer engagement level, if we take our eye off the ball of value creation, I think that's where we lose the whole business. I think the fundamental fulcrum or the backbone of customer engagement strategy is value creation. And over a period of time, what we've seen is that as more or diverse forces have become active in creating value, like the digital health industry, for example, or information has become accessible to anybody, and the cost of accessing information is almost zero, right? And so where does the rep's role then become important? So like I said, when I was a rep in Serdia, the doctors used to appreciate the value that I brought in terms of information and communication. But I think that's not true today. So then why stay with the same model? Why are we not thinking about how that value thing, how the focus of value creation has shifted, and how our strategy should evolve alongside of that? So I think that is something that is worth pondering on.
Absolutely. I think very clearly put forward, information is mundane. How you create value out of that information is the crux, and relationships again, engaging the physician has been really, really hard. We have heard speakers say that, 20 years back, 15 minutes was a no-brainer. We could get that time. Today, engaging him for 15 seconds is a challenge because he's already on three devices. Either his phone is buzzing or he's on WhatsApp or there is somebody at the door. It's very, very difficult to get time and get quality time where he's really focused on your message. So digital era has possibly also increased the difficulty
Yeah.
in engaging physicians, though there is much more information. Refining and getting that attention is a leverage, I think, which is rare. Today is a Gen AI, world, and it's one of the most hot topics across industries. So, how do you see that it could be leveraged in the pharma sector, particularly from a sales and marketing perspective?
Well, I think Gen AI at this point of time, from strictly from a pharma perspective, is on Gartner's hype cycle. It's kind of moving up that amazement chain. So there's a great deal of attraction for a new product, or a new technology that has come in. Everybody wants to learn more about it. Everybody wants to understand what it can do, but few people know what it actually does. And so it is rapidly approaching the trough of disillusionment. So from on the Gartner cycle, when you do a hype and then it just goes down like that until you actually understand the technology, it's rapidly approaching that curve, is what I feel. Because there are lots of misconceptions around Gen AI, especially from a pharma perspective, where Gen AI, like digital, is something that is looked at as a panacea for all evil. It's a solution for all your problems. If I can get an LLM into my organization, everything is going to get sorted. Or so the basic understanding is lacking, and it's not because pharma doesn't know or is a stranger to data. Right? Pharma is extremely high in terms of understanding, ahead of the curve in terms of implementation, use of data security, data architecture, data privacy, all of that in the back end of the business. So their manufacturing, right from their clinical research, from product discovery on to manufacturing and inventory management and financial controls, all of that has been very well digitalized across the industry, across the whole value chain. What surprises me, and especially in India, is that wisdom of understanding how data can be managed, the importance of data, the use of digital technology has not migrated into the front end. And so sales and marketing is more or less in the same area where it was for the last few decades. And this is like what I was talking about in my previous answer, that the sources of value creation are moving, and unfortunately our marketing strategies are not evolving along with that. And so, we while we have a lot of information about our customers, we have them in isolated pockets. They're either with reps, or they're with managers, or they're with and I'm not talking about the reporting data or the hygiene factor that is captured on SFE tablets and all of that, right? Those data are not enough for us to be able to drive business intelligence decisions. And there's a lot of the behavioral, psychographic things which are actually key towards understanding a customer's personality, towards creating a targeted approach for that customer, towards bringing a lot of personalization where value can be created. These are all obvious value creation opportunities, right? But this is different from our traditional business model of rep meets the doctor, and so on and so forth. So the underlying data architecture is pretty weak, and so an organization has to invest a lot of money and time and effort into cleaning all of that, into creating an architecture first, building layers of data, making sure that they are clean, they are secure, they are not wrong, and all of that, which essentially will then put an LLM model on top of that, or put in an AI based engine on top of that, and all that. Because essentially, things like Chat GPT, every brand manager and his uncle says, I'm using Chat GPT. Now, what are you doing with ChatGPT? I don't get it. Apart from building copy for your visual aid or for your detailing or something like that, I don't think you're really doing much. Okay, and so what is ChatGPT? Right, ChatGPT is basically semantic search. which Google can also give you, right? Because Google has kind of been pioneering this business for a long time. Search is essentially the most important part of the way in which AI is getting used. Now, if I do not know what I'm searching for, how will I get something which is of value? And so at this point of time, I see people experimenting, without really knowing what is the end game, what should I be working for. Prompt engineering is not understood. There's a lot of stuff that things are not doing now. When I got out of the corporate world in 2017, I started my own company and I started working with clients. At that point of time, everybody would say, can you build a website for me? In 2018, it became apps. Okay, in 2019, it became AI. Okay, because can you do AI for me? And my question to them is, where do you think the I in the AI comes from? And now, AI is, it's very easy for you to say, AI, do you have data? Do you have data in a structured way? Do you have a full fledged hack proof kind of, a central repository of all that information? How is a machine supposed to learn if it has no backend to feed off? Now, these basics are probably, things that need to be taken care of. And I think that is where the trough of disillusionment is going to happen. And then the enlightenment will start. That's where people will actually understand how important this is. And it's not that people in the organization don't know this, it's just that they are working in silos. There are a lot of people in drug discovery who are very familiar with all of this. Or there are a lot of guys in clinical research who are very familiar with all of this. But the marketing guys will probably not reach out to them thinking that they don't know what my problem is. And so over a period of time, this is going to become like another advertising agency. Today, our marketing brains are outsourced to ad agencies, right? They write the copy, they develop the creatives, they build the campaigns, they do all of it, and the brand manager basically is only sitting and saying maza nahi aaya, okay, or asking them for more options or doing things like that. There's basically very little. Now, I'm not saying every. I know I'm sounding like it's a general brushstroke around the industry, but I'm talking about the majority of people I come across. There are obviously people who are really good, very creative, very smart, but that's a minority, unfortunately. And so our dependence on ad agencies has become so high that, it's like outsourcing your brain, your marketing brain to them. And my fear is that people are expecting AI or Gen AI to become something like that, like a crutch, which will take care of all my issues. I may have a weak brand strategy, but then if I expect AI to kind of repair all of that and address it in such a way that I become brand leader, and that those expectations, the lack of understanding of the back end, the lack of understanding of what the kind of effort that organizations like y'all have gone through to create the products that you have is probably still work in progress.
True. I think I agree with you that the fundament of business and data is first step towards trying to any kind of a business intelligence or an AI. So AI is just the icing on the cake, but where is the cake? So when we are in fact working at Multiplier with clients, we find the same pain. There's hardly relevant data. If it is relevant data, it is incomplete, or else it is out of date. So it's so out of date that, really speaking, no inference can be made by any LLM model. Forget about LLM. Even a very intelligent human being cannot really infer anything from the data. So that's the situation. So first we have to clean that out, we have to make it relevant, we have to make it complete. And many of these points that you mentioned, which are ignored: the psychographic profile of your client, of your prescribers. How do they touch, feel, and how do they empathize with your product strategy? Do they really appreciate what you're bringing to the table? What's the kind of personality that particular person has? Is he scientific oriented? Is he marketing oriented? Is he patient centric? Is he a very social person? All these things go into your brand strategy and defining the way in which your message will reach out to that particular customer segment. And once you have done that, once you have identified the strategy, of course you can take help of LLM models to make it neater, to make it more precise, more accurate. But till you train those models, how will the model really understand what you want to do? And I think that's where the another gap which comes from the industry. And I feel that LLMs will actually support people who are much more knowledgeable than the people who are less knowledgeable, because they understand what's needed in the market. So walking through the industry, really dabbling on various things is extremely crucial. And any of our listeners who are listening to this, please don't jump the gun, go into LLM modeling and all that kind of fancy stuff that's being talked about without knowing the fundamentals. I think that's what is my takeaway from listening to Salil's journey.
True. That's very true.
So all those fancy terms can stay, but the fundamentals have to be in place. Your data needs to be clean, your business strategy needs to be understood. And end of the day, we will still talk to human beings. So we better understand the cultural fits. We better understand what works in a particular domain and what does not. So all those things will stay. So wonderful conversation, Mr. Salil, and thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights and experience with us today. Your expertise in pharma marketing and your impressive professional journey has provided us with such a deep understanding of how data-driven strategies can actually drive significant business growth and innovation. To our listeners, we hope you found this episode of Pharma Marketing Playbook, Data Gen AI, and beyond as enlightening as we did. The rapidly evolving world of pharma demands continuous learning, and insights from experts like Mr. will help us in navigating this landscape. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel and leave a review. Until next time, this is Soumya Prakash signing off. Stay innovative, stay informed, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in pharma marketing. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. We hope that the deep insights and knowledge shared today will help your business and brand grow by leaps and bounds. Remember to follow the podcast. And if you wish to know more about Multiplier AI solutions, please visit the links